The scream that tore through the frozen marsh was barely human, raw and desperate enough to pull Xander Oakes from his trap line, even though every instinct told him to keep moving before the winter sun dropped below the tree line. He had been working the northern edge of the Blackwater Swamp for 3 years now, and he knew better than most that nothing good ever came from investigating strange sounds in these waters, especially not in the dead of winter when the ice turned treacherous, and the cold could kill a man in minutes. But the scream came again, weaker this time, and Xander found his boots changing direction before his mind had fully decided, his breath puffing white clouds into the bitter air as he crashed through the frozen reeds toward the sound. What he found made him stop dead in his tracks, his hand instinctively going to the knife at his belt before his brain caught up with what his eyes were seeing. A young woman, was trapped chest-deep in a section of marsh where the ice had given way, her green skin stark against the black water and white ice surrounding her. Her dark hair was plastered to her skull, and even from 20 feet away Xander could see the violent shaking that had taken over her body. But it was the tusks, small but unmistakable, jutting from her lower jaw that made his breath catch. An orc. He had never seen one this far south, this far from the mountain territories where their clans supposedly lived. Her eyes, a startling amber color, locked onto his, and he saw the exact moment she registered what he was. Human. The fear that flashed across her face was quickly replaced by something harder, more resigned, as if she had already accepted that her fate had just gotten worse instead of better. She did not call out again, did not beg for help, just watched him with that strange mixture of defiance and despair that made something twist uncomfortably in Xander's chest. "How long have you been in there?" He called out, already shrugging off his pack and pulling out the coil of rope he carried for emergencies. She stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this was some kind of trap. "Since dawn," she finally answered, her voice hoarse and shaking from the cold. The ice looked solid. Dawn. That meant she had been in the freezing water for at least 6 hours, maybe more. Xander did not waste time responding, just tied one end of the rope around the thickest tree trunk he could find and secured the other end around his own waist. The ice creaked ominously under his weight as he moved closer, distributing his body as flat as he could manage, using the technique his father had taught him years ago for rescuing trapped animals. "Stay still," he ordered, inching forward. "I am coming to you." "Why?" The question was blunt, confused. "I am orc." "I can see that," Xander grunted, focusing on the ice beneath him rather than the very good question she had just asked. Why was he risking his life for an orc? His neighbors in the settlement would call him mad or worse. There were stories about orcs, about their savagery, about the wars that had raged a generation ago, before the uneasy peace had settled over these borderlands. But all Xander could see was someone dying, alone and cold, and that seemed to matter more than the color of her skin or the shape of her teeth. The ice groaned and spider-webbed beneath him when he was still 10 feet away, and he had to redistribute his weight, moving even slower. Sweat was freezing on his forehead despite the cold, and his heart hammered against his ribs. "What is your name?" he asked, partly to keep her conscious, partly to distract himself from the very real possibility that they were both about to die in this frozen hellhole. "Grusha," she managed through chattering teeth. "Grusha, Ironhide, why does it matter?" "Because I would like to know the name of the person I am currently risking my neck to save," Xander said, finally close enough to extend his arm toward her. "Can you reach my hand?" She tried, but her movements were sluggish, uncoordinated. Hypothermia had clearly set in deep. Xander had to get closer, and the ice was already barely holding him. He made a decision that was probably stupid, untied the rope from around his waist and slid it forward toward her. "Loop this under your arms. Can you do that?" Grusha's fingers were clumsy, nearly useless, but she managed to get the rope positioned with his verbal guidance. Once it was secure, Xander began the careful process of inching backward, using his body weight to help pull her toward the stronger ice. The effort made his muscles scream, and twice more the ice beneath them both cracked alarmingly. But finally, she was out of the water, her green skin almost blue with cold, her whole body convulsing with shivers so violent they looked painful. He did not have time to be gentle. Xander hauled her up and over his shoulder, staggering under her weight. She was solid, muscular despite the cold, heavier than he had expected, but he had carried full-grown deer out of this swamp before. He could manage. His cabin was 40 minutes away at a normal pace. Carrying her, in this cold with night falling fast, he gave himself an hour if they were lucky. Grusha did not speak during the journey, and Xander could not tell if she had lost consciousness or was simply too weak to form words. He focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on the warm glow he knew awaited them, on the fire he kept banked during the day specifically so he could return to warmth. His legs were burning, and his lungs felt raw by the time his cabin finally appeared through the darkening trees, smoke still wisping from the chimney exactly as he had left it. Getting her inside was a blur of motion. He kicked the door open, deposited her on the rug in front of the fireplace, and immediately began building up the fire until it roared. Then came the hard part. Her clothes were frozen to her body, and leaving them on would kill her as surely as the water had tried to. Xander had helped his sister through a winter illness once, had undressed her when she was too fevered to manage it herself, and he tried to summon that same clinical detachment now. "Grusha, I need to get these wet clothes off you," he said loudly, clearly, in case she could hear him. "You will die otherwise. Do you understand?" She made a sound that might have been agreement, and that was all the permission he was going to get. Working quickly, trying not to think too hard about what he was doing, Xander peeled away the sodden leather and rough wool that clung to her, replacing them with every dry blanket he owned. Once she was covered, he grabbed the kettle he kept on the hook and poured barely warm water into a cup, pressing it to her blue lips. "Drink," he ordered. "Small sips." She managed a few swallows before her eyes drifted closed again. Xander watched the shallow rise and fall of her chest beneath the blankets, checking her pulse at her wrist. Still alive, still fighting. He settled himself into the chair beside the fireplace, adding another log to keep the warmth intense, and realized with a strange jolt that he had just brought an orc into his home, into the one place in the world that was entirely his own. His neighbors would call it madness. His neighbors might call it treason, given the uneasy peace between their peoples. But as he watched her breathe, watched the color slowly begin to return to that green skin, Xander found he could not bring himself to care what anyone else might think. The night stretched long and tense. Every hour, Xander checked her pulse, her breathing, dribbled more warm water or weak broth between her lips. Somewhere around midnight, the violent shaking finally began to ease, and around 2 in the morning, her breathing deepened into something that looked more like actual sleep than unconsciousness. Only then did Xander allow himself to doze, his head dropping forward onto his chest, his body too exhausted to maintain vigilance any longer. He woke to the sound of movement and the sensation of being watched. Dawn light was creeping through the cabin's single window, weak and gray. Grusha was awake, sitting upright with the blankets clutched to her chest, her amber eyes fixed on him with an expression he could not quite read. Wariness, certainly, confusion, maybe something else underneath. "You are awake," Xander said, his voice rough with sleep. "How do you feel?" "Like I drowned and came back," she answered honestly. Her gaze swept the cabin, taking in the rough furniture, the drying herbs hanging from the rafters, the row of traps and tools along one wall. "Why did you save me?" There it was again, that same question from yesterday. Xander stood, his back protesting, and moved to the fireplace to start water heating. "Because you needed saving." "I am orc," Grusha said again, as if he might have somehow missed that detail. "Your people hate my people. There are laws against helping us, are there not?" "Not laws exactly," Xander admitted, measuring tea leaves into 2 cups. "Just expectations, prejudices, but I have never been good at doing what people expect." He glanced over his shoulder at her. "Are you hungry? I have bread and some dried meat." "Probably not what you are used to, but it is food." She watched him with that same wary confusion, as if kindness from a human was so foreign she did not know how to process it. "I am hungry," she finally admitted quietly, and Xander heard the vulnerability beneath those simple words. He prepared a simple meal, giving her the larger portion, and they ate in a silence that was only partially uncomfortable. Xander caught himself watching her when he thought she was not looking, noting the way her small tusks caught the light, the proud set of her shoulders even wrapped in blankets, the way her pointed ears twitched at every small sound. She was striking, he realized, in a way that had nothing to do with human standards of beauty, and everything to do with the fierce intelligence in her eyes and the strength evident in every line of her body. "I was tracking a deer," Grusha said suddenly, breaking the silence. "I have been traveling, living off the land. The deer went into the swamp and I followed, thought I could cross where it had crossed, but the ice gave way." "Where is your clan?" Xander asked, then winced. "Sorry, that might be too personal a question." "I have no clan," Grusha said flatly. "Not anymore. I was cast out 8 months ago." Xander waited, sensing there was more to the story if she wanted to share it. After a long moment staring into her tea, Grusha continued. "There was a human child, from one of the border settlements. He got lost in the mountains during a storm. I found him, brought him to the edge of his village, left him where his people would find him. Someone saw me, tracked me back. My clan learned what I had done. And they cast you out for saving a child." Xander could not keep the disbelief from his voice. Grusha's laugh was bitter. "The old hatreds run deep, especially in the mountains. The elders said I had betrayed our people, shown weakness to the enemy. They gave me 1 day to leave and said if I ever returned, I would be killed." She looked at him directly then, her amber eyes hard. "So you see, we are not so different, you and I, both foolish enough to help when we should not." "I do not think saving lives is foolish," Xander said quietly. "Perhaps that is why we are both alone." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth. Xander lived out here precisely because he had never fit in with the settlement, with their rigid expectations and narrow worldviews. After his father died and his sister married and moved east, there had been nothing keeping him in the village except inertia and disappointment. The trap lines and the solitude had seemed preferable to forcing himself into a mold that would never fit. "You can stay here," he heard himself say, "until you are fully healed, until the weather breaks. It is not much, but it is warm and there is food enough for 2. Grusha stared at him as if he had just offered her the moon. "You cannot mean that." "I do not say things I do not mean," Xander replied. "Stay, rest, heal. You nearly died yesterday. You need time to recover your strength." For the first time since waking, something in Grusha's expression softened just slightly. "I do not understand you, Xander Oakes. Most people do not," he said with a slight smile. "Lucky for you, most people are not here." She did not smile back, not exactly, but something in her eyes warmed fractionally, and Xander counted it as a victory. The first days were awkward in the way that sharing small spaces with strangers always is, made more complicated by the gulf of species and history between them. Xander went about his routines, checking his trap lines, chopping firewood, maintaining the cabin, while Grusha slowly regained her strength. He had given her his one spare set of clothes, rough homespun that fit her strangely but at least was dry and warm, and she moved around the cabin with a careful precision, as if always aware of how much space she occupied. On the third day, Xander returned from the trap line to find the cabin cleaner than he had ever kept it. The floor swept, the dishes washed, his tools organized with military efficiency. Grusha was sitting by the fire, working a whetstone along the edge of one of his hunting knives with expert precision. "You did not have to do that," Xander said, setting down his catch for the day. "I do not accept charity well," Grusha replied without looking up. "If I am to stay here, I will earn my keep. You are healing from nearly dying. You do not have to earn anything." Now she did look up, her amber eyes sharp. "Yes, I do, for my own pride if nothing else." Xander recognized stubbornness when he saw it, mostly because he possessed plenty of it himself. "Fair enough, but you should rest too. Healing takes energy." "I have rested enough," Grusha said firmly, setting aside the knife and standing. "Show me how you prepare what you catch, I can help." So began a new rhythm to their days. Xander taught her his methods for skinning and preparing the animals from his traps, and was surprised to find she already knew much of it, though orc techniques differed in small ways from human ones. She taught him a method for tanning leather that required fewer materials and produced a softer result. When he went to check his northern trap line, she insisted on coming along, and her sharp eyes caught 3 subtle game trails he had somehow missed in 3 years of working this territory. They talked more as the days passed, in fragments and pieces. Xander learned that Grusha was 21, just 3 years younger than himself, that she had been training to be a hunter for her clan before her exile, that she loved the deep quiet of early morning in the forest and hated the taste of wild onions but ate them anyway, because they were nutritious, that she had a younger brother she missed terribly and hoped was faring well without her. Grusha learned that Xander had grown up in a settlement 2 days south, that his father had been a trapper before him, that his mother had died when he was young and he barely remembered her face anymore, that he had a sister named Sarah who wrote him letters he sometimes did not answer for months because he never knew what to say, that he preferred the company of trees and animals to most people, but not all people, that he played a battered wooden flute on lonely evenings, simple melodies his father had taught him. "Play something," Grusha said one night, after they had finished a dinner of rabbit stew and the last of the winter vegetables from his cold cellar. Xander hesitated, suddenly self-conscious in a way he had not been in years. He only played for himself, alone, when there was no one to hear and judge. But Grusha was watching him with open curiosity, no mockery in her expression, and he found himself retrieving the flute from its place above the door. The melody that emerged was one of the oldest he knew, a slow wandering thing his father had called the river's path. Xander kept his eyes on his fingers as he played, on the worn wood and the familiar placement of holes, and so he did not see Grusha's expression shift, softening into something vulnerable and aching. When the last note faded, the silence in the cabin felt full rather than empty. "That was beautiful," Grusha said quietly. "I did not know humans made such music." "Some of us do," Xander replied, feeling his face heat slightly. "Probably not as impressive as orc music." "We do not have music like that," Grusha admitted. "Our songs are all drums and chanting, war cries and work rhythms. I have never heard something so." She paused, searching for the word. Gentle. The word hung between them, and Xander felt something shift in his chest, some barrier crumbling that he had not quite realized was there. He saw Grusha not just as an orc or a stranger or someone he had saved, but as a person, complex and real, and sitting close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her amber eyes. He cleared his throat, breaking the moment. I can teach you if you want. It is not difficult. Grusha's smile was small but genuine, the first real smile he had seen from her. I would like that. Winter deepened around them, and the days fell into a pattern that felt less like coexistence and more like partnership. They worked together with increasing ease, their movements coordinating without discussion, each anticipating what the other needed. Grusha proved to be an exceptional hunter, far better than Xander, and she taught him tracking techniques he had never imagined. In return, he taught her to read, laboriously working through the handful of books he owned by firelight while snow piled against the cabin walls. This word, Grusha asked one evening, pointing to a line in his father's old journal, perseverance, Xander read. It means continuing despite difficulty, stubbornness with a purpose. Ah, Grusha grinned, her tusks catching the firelight. That explains why it appears so often in your father's writing. You come by it honestly. Says the woman who insisted on checking trap lines in a snowstorm, Xander retorted. That was important. The storm would have destroyed them. The storm nearly destroyed us. They were sitting close together on the floor in front of the fire, the way they always did for reading lessons now, and Xander was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from Grusha's shoulder where it pressed against his own. When had they gotten so comfortable with proximity? When had the sight of her green skin and pointed ears gone from strange to simply Grusha, as familiar as his own reflection? Xander, Grusha said softly, and something in her tone made him turn to look at her fully. I need to tell you something. His heart kicked against his ribs. All right. I have been here nearly 6 weeks now, she began, her eyes on the book rather than him. My injuries are long healed. The worst of winter has passed. I should start thinking about moving on. The words hit Xander like a fist to the chest. Moving on, of course. She could not stay here forever, hiding in his cabin, and he had no right to want her to. But the thought of the cabin without her, of eating meals alone again, of silence unbroken by her voice, filled him with a hollow, aching dread. Where would you go? He managed to ask. I do not know, Grusha admitted. Further south, maybe. I heard there are lands past the great river where the wars never reached, where orcs and humans trade peacefully. It might be easier there. That is at least 2 months' travel, Xander said, through territory you do not know. I managed 8 months before I met you. You also nearly died in a frozen swamp. Grusha finally looked at him then, and her expression was complicated, painful in a way that made Xander's breath catch. I cannot stay here forever, Xander. Eventually, someone from your settlement will come to check on you to trade or bring news. What happens when they find me here? What happens to you when they learn you have been harboring an orc? I do not care what they think, Xander said fiercely. You should, Grusha replied. They could drive you out, same as my clan drove me out. You have a life here, a home. I will not be the reason you lose it. What if I want you to stay? The words came out before Xander could stop them, raw and honest and impossible to take back. What if losing you is worse than losing anything else? Grusha's eyes widened, her breath catching audibly. Xander. I know it is complicated, he continued, the words spilling out now that he had started. I know there are 1,000 reasons why it is a terrible idea. But these past weeks, having you here, working with you, talking with you, teaching you music and learning your tracking methods, it has been the happiest I have been in years. Maybe ever. And the thought of going back to being alone, it feels unbearable now. You do not know what you are saying, Grusha said, but her voice shook. The things you would face, the prejudice, the hatred. Your own people would turn on you. Let them, Xander said. I did not fit with them anyway, but I fit with you. Do you not feel it too? The silence stretched between them, taut and trembling. Then Grusha reached out, her green hand taking his, her grip strong and warm and certain. I feel it, she whispered. I have felt it for weeks and tried to ignore it because it seemed impossible, because caring for you terrified me. Why terrified? Because I have already lost one home, Grusha said, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Losing another, losing you, would break something in me I do not think I could repair. Xander squeezed her hand, then reached up with his other hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing along the strong line of her jaw. Then do not leave. Stay with me. We will figure out the rest as it comes. You are certain? Grusha asked, searching his face. Truly certain. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Grusha made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then she was kissing him, her tusks pressing gently against his cheeks, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair. Xander kissed her back with all the longing and fear and hope that had been building in his chest for weeks, and it felt like coming home and leaping off a cliff at the same time, terrifying and right in equal measure. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Grusha pressed her forehead to his, her eyes closed. I do not know how to do this, she admitted. How to be with someone, how to trust this. My people do not love the way humans do, I think. We are taught that softness is weakness. I do not need you to be soft, Xander said. I just need you to be here, to be yourself. We will learn the rest together. Together, Grusha repeated like she was testing the word. Then she smiled, fierce and bright and beautiful. Yes, together. They sat together in front of the fire for a long time after that, tangled in each other, talking in quiet voices about what came next. They decided that Grusha would stay through the spring at least, and they would reassess once the traveling season began. If anyone from the settlement came calling, they would face it together. If the situation became dangerous, they would leave together, head south to those rumored lands where differences mattered less. I will not let you sacrifice everything for me, Grusha insisted. If it comes to choosing between this place and my presence, we choose somewhere new, together. Deal, Xander agreed, though I think you underestimate how little this place means without you in it now. Grusha kissed him again for that, and Xander thought that he would gladly give up 1,000 cabins for more of those kisses, for more of the fierce tenderness in her eyes when she looked at him. Spring came slowly to the borderlands, the ice retreating in grudging inches, the first green shoots pushing through the mud with determination. Xander and Grusha worked side by side to prepare for the warmer seasons, repairing the cabin's roof, expanding the garden plot, building a second small shelter for drying meat and storing supplies. They made love by firelight and under the stars, learning each other's bodies with the same patience and attention they had brought to learning each other's minds. Grusha taught Xander the orc approach to combat, which was more about efficiency and less about honor than human fighting. He taught her to swim properly, which she had never learned in the mountains, and they spent long afternoons in the creek once it thawed, Grusha shrieking and laughing as she tried to master floating. It was in those moments of unguarded joy that Xander fell even more deeply in love with her, seeing the girl she might have been if exile and hardship had not forced her to be constantly vigilant. I was thinking, Grusha said one evening as they worked together to prepare dinner, her knife moving with practiced ease through the vegetables they had traded for at the very edge of the settlement, Xander going alone while she waited hidden in the forest. About names. Names. Xander prompted, curious. Among my people, when two individuals decide to bond to make a formal commitment, they often create a new name together, something that represents both of them. She kept her eyes on her work, but Xander could see the tension in her shoulders. I do not know if humans do something similar. We have marriage, Xander said carefully, which is a ceremony, a public declaration, but that would be complicated for us, given that most humans would not recognize a union between species. What if we did not care about human recognition? Grusha looked at him now, her amber eyes bright with emotion. What if we created our own ceremony, our own bond? Just us, with the forest as our witness. Xander set down his knife, giving her his full attention. Are you asking me to marry you, Grusha Ironhide? I suppose I am, she said, her voice steady despite the vulnerability in her expression. If you want that, if I am not being too forward or assuming too much. Yes, Xander said immediately, crossing to her and taking her hands, not caring about the vegetable juice or the half-prepared meal. Yes, absolutely yes. I want to bind my life to yours in whatever way makes sense for us. Grusha's smile was radiant, and she pulled him into a kiss that tasted like joy and promise, and the future they were building together. When they parted, she rested her head against his chest, and Xander wrapped his arms around her, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his ribs. When? She asked. The summer solstice, Xander suggested. The longest day of the year, the height of light and life. We can create our own ceremony, say our own vows. I like that, Grusha murmured. It gives us time to prepare, to decide what we want to promise each other. They spent the weeks leading up to the solstice in a state of barely contained excitement, gathering flowers and herbs that held meaning for them, crafting simple rings from the antlers of a deer. They had taken together, writing and rewriting their vows until the words felt right. Xander carved Grusha's name into a smooth stone he had found by the creek, and she wove his into a bracelet made from leather and copper wire, beautiful in its simplicity. The solstice dawned clear and warm, the sun rising into a cloudless sky. They bathed in the creek and dressed in the best clothes they owned, simple but clean. Xander had picked blue, knowing it brought out Grusha's green skin in a way that made his breath catch. Grusha had chosen brown leather that she had decorated with careful beadwork in the orc style, geometric patterns that represented strength and loyalty. They walked together to a clearing they had chosen, a place where wildflowers grew thick, and an ancient oak tree spread its branches like a blessing. There was no one to officiate, no witnesses except the birds and the breeze, but it felt more real and significant than any ceremony Xander had ever attended in the settlement's chapel. I should go first, Grusha said, taking both of Xander's hands in hers, because I am the one who asked. Xander nodded, his throat tight with emotion. Grusha took a breath, her eyes locked on his. Xander Oakes, you saved my life when you had every reason to leave me to die. You gave me shelter and food and kindness when I had known none for months. But more than that, you gave me yourself, your time and your thoughts and your heart. You taught me that strength can exist alongside gentleness, that difference does not mean enemy, that home is not a place but a person. I vow to stand beside you in all things, to hunt with you and build with you and face whatever challenges come with the courage you have shown me. I vow to honor you with my loyalty, my honesty, and my love for all the days I am given. From this day forward, your path is my path, your home is my home, and your joy and sorrow are mine to share. Tears were streaming down Xander's face by the time she finished, and he made no effort to wipe them away. When he spoke, his voice was rough with feeling. Grusha Ironhide, you entered my life like a storm, sudden and fierce and impossible to ignore. You challenged everything I thought I knew about strength and survival, about loyalty and love. You turned my lonely cabin into a home filled with laughter and purpose. You showed me that the bravest thing a person can do is care for others despite the cost, and you inspired me to be braver than I ever thought possible. I vow to protect you with everything I have, not because you need protection, but because you deserve a partner who will stand and fight beside you. I vow to build a life with you that honors both of our peoples, or neither, or something entirely new. I vow to love you fiercely and tenderly in equal measure for all the days I am given. From this day forward, your path is my path, your home is my home, and your joy and sorrow are mine to share. They exchanged their gifts, the rings settling onto their fingers with a rightness that felt inevitable. Xander tied the leather bracelet around Grusha's wrist, and she placed the carved stone into his palm, curling his fingers around it. By the laws of our own hearts and the witness of this forest, I claim you as my husband, Grusha said formally. By the laws of our own hearts and the witness of this forest, I claim you as my wife, Xander replied. They sealed the vows with a kiss that felt like a promise and a celebration, and a beginning all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both grinning like fools, Xander noticed that the light filtering through the oak leaves had turned golden, as if the world itself was blessing this union. They spent the rest of the day in celebration, just the two of them, eating a feast they had prepared, dancing to music only they could hear, making love in the soft grass with the sun warm on their skin. As the light faded and the stars emerged, they lay tangled together, talking about the future in lazy, dreaming voices. We should head south before winter, Grusha said, tracing patterns on Xander's chest. I think you were right before, that staying here grows more dangerous with each passing season. Someone will eventually discover us, and I will not risk your safety that way. I have been thinking the same, Xander admitted. And I have been writing to my sister carefully, feeling out whether she might help us. She married a trader who works the southern routes. If anyone would know the best places for us to settle, it would be him. You told your sister about me. Grusha sounded surprised, a little afraid. Not in detail, not yet, Xander assured her. But I hinted that I had met someone, that I might be traveling south. She wrote back enthusiastically, told me I was always welcome, that she would like to meet whoever had convinced her hermit brother to consider leaving his trap lines. He pressed a kiss to Grusha's forehead. I think she will like you. Sarah was always the rebellious one, even more than me. I hope you are right, Grusha murmured. The idea of having family again, even human family, it seems impossible. Nothing about us should be possible, Xander pointed out. But here we are anyway. Grusha laughed, the sound rich and warm in the darkness. Here we are, she agreed. They spent the remainder of the summer preparing for their journey, carefully gathering supplies, trading what they could, planning their route. Xander wrote longer letters to his sister, finally revealing the truth about Grusha in a careful, testing way. Sarah's response came back faster than expected, carried by a trader heading north, and Xander's hands shook as he opened it. The letter was characteristically blunt and loving in equal measure. Sarah wrote that she was shocked but not entirely surprised, that she had always known Xander would do something unconventional, that she and her husband would welcome them both when they arrived and help them get established in the southern territories. She included practical advice about which towns were most tolerant, which routes were safest, and which officials could be bribed to overlook irregular paperwork if needed. She called you my wife, Xander said wonderingly, showing Grusha the letter. She did not hesitate or question it. She just accepted it. Grusha read the letter with shining eyes, and when she finished, she folded it carefully and held it against her chest. "We have family again," she whispered. "Both of us." "Both of us," Xander confirmed, pulling her close. They left on a cool morning in early autumn, the first leaves just beginning to turn. Xander took one last look at the cabin that had been his home for 3 years, at the trap lines and the creek and the forest he knew like his own heartbeat. There was sadness in leaving, but it was overwhelmed by the excitement and rightness of moving forward with Grusha by his side. The journey south took them 6 weeks of steady travel, following trader paths and game trails, avoiding settlements when possible, and passing through quickly when necessary. Grusha wore a hood and kept her head down during those times, and Xander's heart raced with anxiety every time someone looked at them too closely. But they were lucky or blessed, or simply careful enough to avoid real trouble, and slowly the landscape changed from the dense northern forests to the rolling hills and broader rivers of the southern territories. They reached Sarah's town on a golden afternoon, the sun warm and the air filled with the scent of harvest. Sarah met them at the edge of town, having received word of their approach from her husband's trading contacts. She was smaller than Xander, with the same dark hair and blue eyes, and she hesitated for only a moment before throwing her arms around him. "You look happy," she said, pulling back to study his face. "Happier than I have ever seen you." "I am," Xander replied simply, reaching for Grusha and drawing her forward. "Sarah, this is Grusha, my wife." Sarah turned her attention to Grusha, and Xander watched his sister take in the green skin, the tusks, the pointed ears, all the visible markers of difference. Then Sarah smiled, warm and genuine, and extended her hand. "Welcome to the family, Grusha. Any woman who can get my brother to write regular letters and leave his hermit cabin is a miracle worker in my book." Grusha took the offered hand carefully, clearly uncertain how to react to such immediate acceptance. "Thank you," she managed, "for welcoming us, for helping us." "Family helps family," Sarah said firmly. "Come on, let me show you the house." "My husband is at the market, but he will be back soon, and we have space for you to stay as long as you need while you get settled." True to her word, Sarah and her husband Marcus welcomed them without reservation. Marcus was a broad, practical man who cared more about a person's character than their species, and within a day of meeting Grusha, he was asking her advice on the best routes through the northern mountains for his trade caravans. Sarah seemed delighted to have another woman to talk to, and Xander often found the two of them bent over books or discussing hunting techniques, becoming fast friends despite their differences. The town itself was larger than Xander's old settlement and more diverse, with a mixture of humans and a scattering of other peoples, including a few orcs who worked as guards or laborers. The locals were more accustomed to seeing different faces, and while Grusha still drew stares, they were more curious than hostile. It was not perfect, but it was better than anything they could have hoped for in the north. Marcus helped them purchase a small plot of land on the outskirts of town, with a decent house and enough space for a large garden and some animals. It needed work, but Xander and Grusha threw themselves into the project with enthusiasm, repairing the roof, mending fences, planning where to plant in the spring. Sarah brought them furniture that she had stored away, and Marcus introduced them to the local merchants who could provide seeds and tools at fair prices. "This is ours," Grusha said one evening as they stood on their porch, watching the sun set over their land. "Truly ours, a home that no one can take from us. As long as we have each other, we will always have a home," Xander replied, wrapping his arm around her waist and pulling her close. They settled into their new life with surprising ease. Xander found work as a hunter, providing game meat to the local markets, and Grusha's skills as a tracker made her invaluable on larger hunting expeditions. They made friends slowly, some with the human neighbors who valued competence over prejudice, some with the small orc community who were cautiously pleased to see a mixed couple surviving and thriving. It was not without challenges. There were still people who muttered when they passed, who refused to do business with them, who made their disapproval clear. Once, a drunk man confronted them in the market, shouting slurs and accusations until Marcus and several other merchants intervened. But for every person who rejected them, there were two more who shrugged and went about their business, treating them as just another couple trying to make a life. Winter came, gentler in the south than in the north, and they spent the cold evenings by their fire, planning for the spring planting and talking about the future. One night, as Xander played his flute and Grusha attempted to follow along on one she had carved herself, she set down her instrument and looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "I have been thinking about children," she said abruptly. Xander's fingers stilled on his flute. "Children? Is that something you want?" Grusha asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I know it is complicated given our differences. I'm not even certain it is possible for humans and orcs to have children together. But if it is, if you want that, then I want it too." Xander set down his flute and took her hands, thinking carefully about his answer. "I had not let myself think about it," he admitted. "But now that you mention it, yes, I would like children with you, to build a family, to create something new from what we have together." He paused. "Do you think it is possible? Has it happened before?" "I do not know," Grusha said honestly. "The stories say it is possible but rare. The children would be mixed, neither fully human nor fully orc. They would face challenges we cannot even imagine." She looked at him intently. "But they would also be ours, and we would love them and protect them with everything we have." "Then we try," Xander said simply, "and we face whatever comes together like we always have." Grusha kissed him then, deep and sweet and full of promise, and they spent the night wrapped in each other, making love and hope in equal measure. Spring brought new life to their land and new life to Grusha herself. When she confirmed that she was pregnant, they held each other and cried with joy and terror, aware of the massive step they had taken into unknown territory. The pregnancy was harder than either had anticipated, with Grusha suffering bouts of sickness and exhaustion that left her bedridden for days at a time. The local healer, an elderly woman named Clara who had seen more in her years than most, examined Grusha with calm professionalism and declared that everything seemed normal, if challenging. "Mixed births are rare but not unheard of," Clara told them. "Your child will be strong with qualities from both parents, but the birth itself may be difficult. Orc babies are larger than human babies, and your wife has a smaller frame than full-blooded orcs." "What can we do?" Xander asked, his hand gripping Grusha's tightly. "Rest, eat well, and trust that nature knows what it is doing," Clara replied. "And I will be here when the time comes, to help in whatever way I can." The months of pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Sarah was a constant presence, bringing food and advice and helping to set up the nursery. Marcus built a beautiful cradle from dark wood, carved with symbols of protection and growth. The orc community, initially wary, sent gifts once they learned of the pregnancy. Soft leather blankets, small clothes, and a blessing from their eldest shaman wishing strength for the mother and child. Grusha grew larger as the summer heat intensified, her movements becoming more labored, but she remained determined to continue working as much as possible. Xander hovered anxiously, trying to balance supporting her independence with his deep fear of something going wrong. They argued occasionally, usually ending with Grusha reminding him that she was strong and Xander reminding her that even the strong needed help sometimes. The labor began on a stormy autumn night, thunder rolling across the sky as Grusha's contractions started. Xander sent for Clara immediately while Sarah stayed with Grusha, timing the contractions and offering steady reassurance. The birth took hours, long and difficult just as Clara had warned, and there were moments when Xander was certain they would lose either Grusha or the baby or both. But Grusha was as fierce in childbirth as she was in everything else, and when the baby finally emerged in the gray dawn light, her cry was strong and healthy. Clara cleaned the infant and wrapped her in soft cloth before handing her to Grusha, who was exhausted but radiant with joy. "A girl," Clara announced, "and she is perfect." Xander moved to Grusha's side, looking down at the tiny creature in her arms. Their daughter had green-tinged skin that was lighter than Grusha's, tiny tusks just barely visible, and dark hair that curled exactly like Xander's own. Her eyes, when they opened, were a stunning mix of amber and blue, and she gazed up at her parents with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone only minutes old. "She is beautiful," Xander whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "You are both beautiful. What should we call her?" Grusha asked, looking up at him with exhausted happiness. They had discussed names for months, debating between human and orc traditions, trying to find something that honored both heritages without favoring one over the other. In the end, it was Sarah who had suggested combining elements from both. "Kara," Xander said softly, testing the name. "It means pure in some human dialects, and it sounds like the orc word for strength." "Xander Oakes." "Kara," Grusha repeated, smiling down at their daughter. "Yes, that is perfect. Welcome to the world, Kara. You are so loved already." The first months of Kara's life were a beautiful, exhausting blur. She was a hungry baby, demanding and loud when she wanted attention, but also quick to smile and calm when held. Xander discovered depths of love he had not known existed, finding joy in the smallest things, her tiny fingers gripping his thumb, the soft sounds she made when sleeping, the way she turned her head toward his voice. Grusha bloomed into motherhood despite her initial fears that she would not know how to be gentle enough. She was patient and attentive, and watching her sing orc lullabies to their daughter in the soft evening light became one of Xander's favorite moments of each day. Sarah visited often, claiming she needed to spoil her niece properly, and Marcus carved a set of small wooden animals that quickly became Kara's favorite toys. As Kara grew from infant to toddler, it became clear that she had indeed inherited qualities from both parents. She had Xander's curiosity and his love of music, often sitting quietly when he played his flute, but she also had Grusha's physical strength and her directness. By the time she was 2 years old, she could climb trees that human children twice her age struggled with, and she had no patience for dishonesty or evasion. The town watched Kara grow with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. Some saw her as proof that the divide between humans and orcs was not insurmountable, a symbol of hope for a more tolerant future. Others saw her as an abomination, a violation of natural law, and made their opinions known through cold stares and muttered comments. Xander and Grusha shielded Kara from the worst of it as best they could, but they knew that eventually she would face the prejudice directly. That moment came when Kara was 4 years old. She had been playing in the town square while Xander and Grusha shopped for supplies, watched over by Sarah, who was at a nearby stall. A group of children had approached, curious about the girl with the strange skin and small tusks. Most were friendly or neutral, but one boy, older and clearly parroting things he had heard at home, called Kara a monster and pushed her hard enough to make her fall. "Kara, already showing signs of her mother's temperament, pushed him back twice as hard and refused to cry despite the scrape on her knee. Sarah intervened before the situation could escalate, but by the time Xander and Grusha arrived, Kara was silent and withdrawn, the light gone from her eyes. That evening, after they had cleaned her scrape and fed her dinner, Kara climbed into Xander's lap and asked the question he had been dreading. "Papa, why did that boy call me a monster?" Xander looked helplessly at Grusha, who came to sit beside them, wrapping them both in her strong arms. Together, they tried to explain the complicated realities of prejudice and fear to a 4-year-old, tried to make her understand that the problem was not with her but with people who had been taught to fear difference. "You are not a monster," Grusha said fiercely, cupping Kara's face in her hands. "You are our daughter, and you are strong and brave and beautiful. Some people will not understand that because they have never learned to see past what is different from themselves. But that is their weakness, not yours. Your mother is right," Xander added. "There will always be people who judge you before they know you, but there will also be people who love you for exactly who you are. Like us. Like Aunt Sarah and Uncle Marcus. Like your friends who were playing with you today before that boy came along." "Did anyone call Mama a monster when she was little?" Kara asked. "Yes," Grusha said honestly. "In different ways from different people. Both orcs and humans have called me things that hurt. But I survived and I found your papa and we built this family. You are stronger than any words, Kara. Never forget that." Kara considered this seriously, her mixed eyes thoughtful. Then she nodded and snuggled deeper into Xander's embrace. "Okay," she said simply. "I am strong like Mama." "Stronger," Grusha said with a smile, "because you have your papa's heart too." As Kara grew older, she did indeed prove strong, developing into a confident girl who could navigate the complexities of her mixed heritage with increasing grace. She learned to read and write from Xander and hunting skills from Grusha. She learned baking from Sarah and business from Marcus. She made friends with the children who looked past her appearance and learned to pity rather than hate those who could not. By the time Kara turned 7, the family had become an established part of the community. Their farm was successful, producing enough to trade and support them comfortably. Xander had gained a reputation as one of the best hunters in the region, and Grusha was frequently hired as a guide for merchants traveling the northern routes. They had built a life that defied the expectations and prejudices that should have destroyed them, and in doing so, had opened doors for others. 2 more mixed couples settled in the town over the following years, both citing Xander and Grusha as inspiration. The local orc community grew slowly, and while tension still existed, there was also a growing sense that coexistence was possible if people simply tried. It was not perfect, not by a long measure, but it was progress, and that mattered. One evening, when Kara was 10 and helping Grusha prepare dinner while Xander repaired a fence outside, she asked another of those questions that cut straight to the heart of things. "Mama, do you ever wish you had stayed with your clan, that you had a normal orc life instead of this?" Grusha paused in her chopping, considering the question seriously the way she always did with Kara's inquiries. "Sometimes I wonder what that life would have been like," she admitted. "I miss my brother, and there are orc traditions I would have liked to pass on to you more fully. But no, I do not wish I had stayed. Saving that human child led to my exile, but it also led me to your father, to you, to this life we have built. I would make the same choice every time. Even though it was hard," Kara pressed. "Especially because it was hard," Grusha said. "The best things in life are rarely easy, little one. Your father and I chose a difficult path, but it was our path, one we walked together, and it brought us more joy than we could have imagined." "I am glad you chose this path," Kara said softly. Even when people are mean, I am glad I exist." Grusha set down her knife and pulled Kara into a fierce hug. "I am glad you exist too, more than I can ever express. You are the best parts of both your papa and me, and you will do amazing things with your life." "Like what?" Kara asked, her voice muffled against Grusha's shoulder. "Whatever you choose," Grusha replied. "That is the gift your father and I fought to give you, the freedom to choose your own path, to decide who you want to be rather than having it dictated by tradition or prejudice." Xander came in then, stamping mud off his boots and catching the tail end of the conversation. "Are we having a serious discussion?" he asked, moving to join them. "Just explaining to our daughter that she can be anything she wants," Grusha said with a smile. "Anything except a bad hunter," Xander teased, ruffling Kara's hair. "I have my reputation to consider." Kara laughed and squirmed free. "I am already a better tracker than you, Papa. Mama said so." "Traitor," Xander said to Grusha in mock outrage. "I speak only truth," Grusha replied serenely. "Our daughter has the best of both our skills. We should be proud, not competitive." "I can be both," Xander declared, which made Kara laugh again. They ate dinner as a family, talking and laughing, the easy intimacy of people who knew and loved each other completely. After Kara went to bed, Xander and Grusha sat on their porch as they often did, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Do you remember the day we met?" Grusha asked, her head resting on Xander's shoulder. "Every detail," Xander replied. "You were the most stubborn person I had ever met, glaring at me like I was the one who had trapped you in that ice." "I thought you were going to leave me there," Grusha admitted. "Or worse, that you had come to finish what the swamp had started." "I could not imagine any other reason a human would approach an orc." "And now?" Xander asked. "Now I cannot imagine my life without you," Grusha said simply. "You gave me everything, Xander. A home, a family, a future I had thought was impossible. How do I ever adequately repay such a gift?" "You already have," Xander said, turning to kiss her forehead. "Every day we spend together, every moment of happiness, every challenge we face and overcome, that is the repayment. You saved me just as much as I saved you, Grusha. I was so lonely before you came into my life, so disconnected from everything that mattered. You taught me what it meant to truly live, to love fiercely and completely, to fight for something bigger than myself." "We saved each other then," Grusha said, lacing her fingers through his. "We did," Xander agreed. "And we will keep saving each other every day for the rest of our lives." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, wrapped in each other and the life they had built, the family they had created against all odds. In the distance, they could hear Kara singing to herself in her room, a mixture of human melody and orc rhythms that perfectly captured who she was. It was a sound that represented everything they had fought for and everything they had won. The years that followed brought their share of challenges and joys, as all lives do. There were droughts that tested their farm, illnesses that frightened them, conflicts with neighbors who never learned to accept their family, moments when the weight of prejudice felt crushing. But there were also births and celebrations, friendships that deepened, small victories that accumulated into larger change. Kara grew into a remarkable young woman, strong and compassionate, determined to use her unique position to bridge the divide between humans and orcs. She became a translator and mediator, helping to facilitate trade and resolve conflicts between the communities. She fell in love with a kind human man who cherished her exactly as she was, and their wedding brought together orcs and humans in a celebration that would have been unthinkable a generation earlier. On the day of Kara's wedding, standing beside Grusha as they watched their daughter pledge her life to the man she loved, Xander felt a profound sense of completion. They had done it. Against every expectation, every obstacle, every voice that said it was impossible, they had built a family and a life and a legacy that would ripple forward through generations. "What are you thinking?" Grusha asked quietly, noticing the tears tracking down his face. "That I would do it all again," Xander said. "Every hard moment, every sacrifice, every terrifying decision. I would choose you every single time, and I would fight just as hard for this future we have created." "As would I," Grusha said, her own eyes bright with emotion. "You are the best decision I ever made, Xander Oakes. Loving you, building this life with you, it has been the greatest adventure of my existence." They held each other as their daughter danced with her new husband, as orcs and humans mingled and celebrated together, as the sun set on a day that represented hope and change, and the power of love to overcome the deepest divisions. In that moment, Xander thought back to the terrified orc girl he had pulled from the freezing swamp so many years ago, and marveled at the journey that simple act of compassion had set in motion. He had saved her life that day, but in doing so, she had saved his in return, teaching him the true meaning of courage and love and commitment. She had repaid his kindness not with gratitude or obligation, but with partnership, with fierce devotion, with a love that broke every rule and exceeded every expectation. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, a family that would carry forward their legacy of choosing love over fear, hope over prejudice, connection over division. As the stars emerged above the celebration, Xander pulled Grusha close and whispered, "Thank you for everything. For choosing me, for staying, for building this impossible, wonderful life with me." "Always," Grusha whispered back. "In this life and whatever comes after, I choose you, forever." And in that promise, repeated countless times over the years in both word and action, lay the true magic of their story. Not that a human had saved an orc, or that they had overcome prejudice to be together, but that they had chosen each other, completely and without reservation, and in doing so had proven that love, real and fierce and uncompromising, could indeed change the world. Their story became legend in the Southern Territories, told and retold with varying degrees of accuracy, but always with the same core message: that kindness to a stranger can change the course of a life, that love recognizes no boundaries of species or culture, and that the bravest thing anyone can do is choose connection over fear. Parents told it to their children as a bedtime story. Young lovers cited it as inspiration for their own difficult relationships. And slowly, gradually, the world began to change. More mixed families appeared in the town and in neighboring settlements. Laws that had prohibited interspecies marriage were quietly amended or ignored. Trade between human and orc territories increased, bringing prosperity to both. It was not a transformation that happened overnight, and there remained pockets of hatred and resistance that would likely persist for generations. But the change had begun, sparked by a single moment of compassion in a frozen swamp, by a human man who had chosen to save a life rather than walk away, and by an orc woman who had chosen to trust and love, despite every reason not to. Xander and Grusha lived to see their grandchildren, a boisterous mix of human, orc, and blended heritage, playing together without the weight of ancient prejudices on their small shoulders. They lived to see the town they had adopted elect its first mixed heritage mayor, a position Kara held with the same fierce dedication she brought to everything. They lived to see genuine friendship and partnership between species become common rather than exceptional. And when they were both old, their bodies worn but their love as strong as ever, they would sit on their porch in the evening light and remember that frozen swamp, that terrified moment when everything changed, when one person chose compassion and another chose trust. And from those choices, an entire world had shifted. "Do you know what I think about most?" Grusha said one such evening, her green skin now weathered and marked with age, her hand still fitting perfectly into Xander's own. "Tell me," Xander said, his voice rougher now but still warm when he spoke to her. "That scream," Grusha said. "The one I made when I was trapped in the ice. I think about how close I came to not making that sound, to just accepting death silently. And I think about how you could have ignored it, could have kept walking to stay safe and warm. Our entire life, our family, Kara and her children and all the change that has rippled out from us, it all hinged on those two small choices. My choice to cry out for help and your choice to answer. I am glad we both made the right choice," Xander said simply. "So am I," Grusha replied, leaning her head on his shoulder exactly as she had done countless times over their decades together. "So am I." They sat together as the sun set. Two souls who had found each other against impossible odds and had built something beautiful and lasting from that chance encounter. Their story, born from desperation and compassion in a frozen swamp, had become a testament to the transformative power of love, to the courage required to break rules that deserved breaking, and to the simple truth that the best way to repay kindness is to pay it forward, to build a world where such kindness is no longer extraordinary but expected. In the end, Grusha had repaid Xander's act of salvation not with a single gesture but with a lifetime of love and partnership, with a family that changed the world, and with proof that sometimes the bravest, most revolutionary act is simply to care for another person, regardless of what society says you should do. And Xander had repaid her trust by never wavering, by standing beside her through every challenge, by choosing her every single day for the rest of his life. It was, they both agreed, the best possible exchange, a repayment that broke all the rules and exceeded every expectation, and one that neither of them would change for anything in the world. Their love story, unconventional and hard-won, became the foundation for change that rippled through generations, proving that sometimes the most powerful force in the world is simply two people deciding that love matters more than fear, and then having the courage to live that truth every single day.